we're obviously looking at how you get your voice heard, and we're particularly, I guess, with government audiences today, and I'm delighted to be joined in today's session. We're actually going to be hearing from Duncan Thorp, who works with us here at Social Enterprise Scotland as our Policy and Public Affairs Manager. So Duncan's always in the background on these calls, but doesn't always speak up. So today, Duncan's joining us for some of the chat and questions. Then we're going to hear from Colin McFarlane from Pagoda, Director at Pagoda Public Relations, and also Secretary of the Association for Scottish Public Affairs. Delighted you're able to join us today, Colin. And then last, we're going to hear from Sheghley, and I did the practice of the pronunciation of the first name, and then I'm like, oh, surname. So we're going to be hearing from Sheghley today. Shelley's joining us from Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, and she's their Public Affairs Officer. So we've got a really great panel, lots of expertise in terms of getting your voice heard, lots of tips. I think those of you who've been around our sector for a long time will know there's lots of people with strong voices, we've got lots of opinions. This is really about how do you get those heard in a really good, strong and effective way, really trying to maximise those communications. So really looking forward to kind of hearing from all of our speakers today. So thank you very much, and we'll start with Duncan.
Thanks, Naomi. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm just going to try and share screen, which I don't think I've ever done before. So I'll just see make sure it works. Everybody see that slide?
All good, Duncan.
Brilliant, perfect. Yeah, just like a really brief slide, just to kind of just show you some of the things that Social Enterprise Scotland currently does in terms of helping our members get their voices heard. So one of the things we do is quite a basic thing in a lot of ways, is relationship building with national and local government. So that could be government ministers, government officials, civil servants, but also local government officials as well. That's an ongoing thing, which we do obviously in the background, helping members to get their voices heard, helping members to influence policy making. Another quite basic thing as well is Scottish Government consultations. That could be around anything. It could be around procurement, it could be around public service reform, a whole host of things. And the process for that is generally when a consultation comes out, a relevant consultation comes out, we'll then contact our members and say, what do you think about this particular consultation? What do you think we should be saying? Sometimes response rate to these are quite low, so we're always looking at ways to kind of really engage members a bit better. I suppose one of the purposes of this webinar really is a starting point for that conversation, just to ask members, how we can help them a bit better, how we can help them understand policies, which is obviously sometimes quite complex. A lot of you will know about the cross-party group on social enterprise in the Scottish Parliament, the CPG for short. That's been going for a number of years now. Actually, we've covered a lot of topics around that, health and social care, again, public service reform, procurement, a lot of the obvious stuff in a lot of ways. And that is a way to bring MSPs together with social entrepreneurs in a kind of conversation around particular policy topics at each meeting, and just really allow MSPs to know exactly what social enterprises want. So we do have our next meeting with the CPG coming up next week. So you're very welcome to book a place at that. And that will be around kind of what social enterprises want from the next Scottish Government and Parliament. We have our local authority group as well, Social Enterprise Local Authority Group, which is social enterprise support officers within local authorities, generally economic development, a couple of policy people as well, and some business gateway officers as well. And that's a way for us to get that social enterprise voice heard within the local authority kind of arena, and also a way for local authority officers to learn from each other about how they're supporting social enterprises in their particular areas. And we also have a couple of guest speakers at every one of those meetings. We've got another meeting of that, which is actually this week. Our annual AGM policy event. So this last year we had a few days of a policy event around some key topics about young people and employment, climate change, these kind of topics. And I think this year we're going to be looking at doing something similar to that again. We've done that for a number of years now as well. So there's always a big policy focus around the AGM event. Again, another kind of relationship building one. So we do have relationships with various think tanks. Some of those have spoken at our CPG meetings and our AGM events, and also with academic organisations as well. So University of Edinburgh, one of our members, we have a close relationship with them. Glasgow Caledonian University as well. So there's a number of relationships there, which are very strong. Around elections, we generally do a manifesto. So the process for that would be, again, speaking to members, asking what they want from the next government. But this time, because things are a bit different, we've decided to have a policy pledge. So that pledge will be asking politicians and political parties to support social enterprise in the third sector. And we're going to be partnering with a number of intermediary organisations around this. So it's just something a bit different. It's quite simple and straightforward. It is a case of just demonstrating that social enterprise is really, really valuable in the current climate, in the current context for our economy and our society, and just making sure that we kind of hold politicians to account in a way, just to demonstrate the support for social enterprise. This list isn't exhaustive, by the way. There are a number of other things, but it's worth highlighting a few of these. And there is also the Social Enterprise UK Policy Forum as well. So that is a number of UK-wide intermediary bodies, plus ourselves and the Wales Cooperative Centre and organisations like that, who come together to talk about and take action on a number of UK-wide issues. So that's just a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we do to help our members engage. But as I said, we are really, really keen on hearing from members and other social enterprises as well as other organisations about what we can do better, how we can help you engage better with policymakers at a national and local levels. Well, it's worth emphasising at different levels. So that's just me, just a very brief, quick overview of what we currently do. But yeah, please get in touch after the webinar, and I look forward to hearing from our other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Duncan. I think it's useful to have that overview of the different things that we do around the policy environment. So there's always so many consultations happening, and choosing, I guess, sometimes which ones to respond to and which ones to let others respond to is always a challenge as well. And always good to get the plug in for the CPG. So that's next week. Instead of our Wednesday webinar, we'll be doing that next week. So I'm delighted to next be joined by Colin McFarlane, and I'm going to be pulling up Colin's slides in a moment. So welcome to Colin for joining us today. I'm sure he's going to be giving us a whole heap of tips and bits of advice based on his experience, and really looking forward to hearing your presentation, which I'll bring up now, Colin.
Thanks, Naomi. Thanks, Duncan, also for the invite to speak this morning. It's one of these ones where it's always a bit disconcerting when you can't see the audience, but we'll give it a go, and we'll see how it goes. I thought the best place is, Naomi's bringing up my slides. I thought the best place to start. Hold on 2 seconds. Let's just fix my video. There you go. Yeah, so I thought the best place to start was to tell you a little bit about Pagoda and myself, and then we'll kind of launch into how I think you should be thinking about your public affairs and your influence and your lobbying activity going forward. So for those of you who haven't heard of Pagoda, we are one of Scotland's largest independent PR and public affairs consultancies. We've been operating one form or another since the late 90s, and we have a team of 16 who normally work out of our office in Edinburgh and Newcastle. On my side of the business, which is the public affairs side, we support a number of clients to do exactly what we're talking about this morning, which is getting your voice heard in government. There's quite a range and a different spectrum of organisations, so big national and international companies like Boots and Asda to smaller charities and social enterprise. So we cover the full spectrum, and what you'll often find is that much of the strategy and much of the tactics that are used in public affairs are the same, regardless of the size of the organisation. Obviously, there are some nuances, but by and large, the tactics that you deploy for some of the bigger hitters are exactly the same as they would be for smaller charities and perhaps social enterprises. For me, I've spent the last 7 or so years advising clients on public affairs work, but the previous 10 before that, I worked in a number of roles across Holyrood and Westminster. So I've been the lobbyist, and I've also been the lobbied, so which gives me a bit of a decent perspective on what works and what doesn't. And in my spare time for what little I have, to be honest, I'm the secretary of the Association for Scottish Public Affairs, and you'll hear from Sheghley as well, who's also on our committee. So we're the representative body for PA professionals in Scotland. We've got about 130 organisations who are members. And if the day job doesn't keep me busy enough, and if ASPA doesn't keep me busy enough, I also help run Falkirk Football Club as a director. So got a lot on my plate. And if any of you think that the decision making by government is bizarre, get involved in football and you'll see a whole different world. So that's probably enough about me. What I was proposing to do for the next 10 minutes or so is take a kind of high level look at what I think is best practice and some of the things that you should be thinking about before you even get anywhere near engaging with MSPs or Scottish Government officials or councillors or whoever it is that you see as your key stakeholders. What I'm not planning to do is cover off the specific activities that you could undertake, because I appreciate there's probably quite a diverse group that are on the call today, and what works for one group won't work for another. So public affairs is quite a tailored business, so I'm going to sort of refrain from talking about that, but I think Shelley's going to cover off things like manifestos and things, so that could be quite useful. Naomi, could you bump the slide on, please? Thanks. So I'll kick off talking you through the process that I normally work with the clients. First up, before we even think about planning off a PA campaign, what I always like to do with clients is sit down and ask some really difficult questions, some uncomfortable questions, because I think it's important that before you even embark on anything, you've covered these off. So for me, what kind of campaign are you looking to run? What's your issue? It's clear you've identified that there's something that needs to be changed, but what do you need to do to get other people to care about it? And why is your issue more important than the thousands of others that need to be fixed? So for me, to get people to buy into your idea or your campaign, it needs to have a logical and an emotional side. So if you look at things like marketing theory, for example, you look at the human brain, it's divided into two sides, that logical and the emotional side. So to get people on board, what you really need to do is you need to appeal to both of them. So when you're thinking about your own campaign or your own lobbying activity, ask yourself, can you actually explain the logical and the emotional reasons for why you're seeking change? Not a lot of people can do that, and I think it's one of the most important things. Secondly, I think you really need to be clear on what it is you want to achieve. I hear it all the time from my clients, we just want to be part of the debate. Okay, yeah, that's fine, but why? What's the point if you're not going to use your voice to argue for change? Arguably, if you just want people to know who you are, then spend your money on advertising rather than actually influencing. So I think that's a key thing and a key question you need to ask yourself. Next two questions on the slide are linked. So firstly, if your influencing activity is successful and you get in front of the people that matter, do you actually have a solution? And is your solution workable, realistic, and achievable to deliver? So, for example, if your solution requires investment, do you know how much it's going to cost, and can you evidence the impact? More importantly, do we have the money in the current economic climate, or is there another way to deliver your influence objectives without the financial cost? I remember having a conversation with one of the Scottish Government's top civil servants, I won't name them, but this was about a year ago, and her advice was pretty clear. If you're coming to government asking for things that involve significant expenditure, then you might as well turn around, and that was the phrase she used, because frankly, government doesn't have a lot of money floating around for every single campaign, so you have to be a bit more innovative on what you're asking for, and I'll cover that a wee bit more in a few minutes. And then perhaps the most uncomfortable question that the organisations need to ask, and for me, they don't ask it often enough, but actually, are there others who are better placed, have stronger connections, perhaps even the era government, who would be better taking forward this campaign than you? As I say, it's an uncomfortable question, but it might actually be beneficial for the issue in the campaign that you may take a more collaborative approach. So you don't take the lead on something, but you actually work with others who you might not ordinarily work with. They might be competitors and might be working in the same space that you don't particularly get on with. But that's quite commonplace in other sectors. I don't know if it's commonplace in social enterprise, but often you do see competitors coming together to work for the common good. So that's something I think you should be thinking about. And then finally, do you have the resources to do what needs to be done? As probably all of us know, political campaigning can be hugely time consuming, and it's quite easy to get dragged down a rabbit hole. So For example, you might get asked to sit on a government working group that takes up months, sometimes even years of your time. But at the end of that process, are you any further forward? So the question you need to ask yourself, do you have the time and resource to invest in the right things? But also, do you have the judgment to know when to say no? And I think that's really important. So for me, it's important that before you even think about a public affairs strategy, it's important you're able to answer yes, honestly, to all of those questions. Naomi, could you bump me on, please? Brilliant. So this is the fun stuff, strategy development. Now, you can call it a few things. You can call it a public affairs strategy, a stakeholder engagement strategy, a comms strategy. For me, the name's less important, but what sits beneath it is vital. So what I've tried to illustrate here is that in any public affairs strategy, you've got to kind of build your strategy based on solid foundations. So for me, I see those 5 as your solid foundation. So firstly, know the landscape. So in most instances, you're going to be seeking to influence officials, councillors, MSP, who've probably been immersed in this issue for a number of years. So you need to know what you're talking about. You need to know what the policy landscape is inside and out. You need to know what's been tried in the past. You need to know what people are talking about just now. And you also need to know, well, if you take action on X, how does that impact on Y? So really getting underneath the bonnet is a phrase that people use on the issue. And a lot of you will have that in your own specific area, but it's just particularly important. Stakeholder mapping. So this is really about using your resources most effectively. So I'm working with a client just now. We've mapped our potential stakeholders, and it comes up to something like 215, 220 people who have all got an interest or an impact on their business. So frankly, very few organisations in the world can monitor and engage with that number of stakeholders. So for you, it's about categorising those stakeholders into those who have firstly got a high interest in your line of work or your organisation, but also got a high ability to influence the change you want to see. If you don't prioritise them, what you'll end up is you'll end up tilting at windmills. You'll try to be all things to all men in that phrase, and you won't actually accomplish anything. So really focus down and prioritise on who are the people who are really going to make a difference in this. And for me, that's probably a maximum of 10 people or 10 organisations that you want to be working with. Taking the flip side to that as well, it's important for you to know your stakeholders, but it's equally important that your stakeholders know you. So I always advise my clients never to be scared to ask honest questions of your stakeholders. So ask them what it is they think of you, ask them what they know about your organisation and the work you do, and you'll probably be quite surprised that they come back with. Some people will know you inside out, some people will have a very vague recollection of you, and some people will have a completely wrong opinion of what it is you are and what it is you do. So that kind of information, before you even engage with stakeholders, you need to know that. And frankly, if you're too scared to ask it or you don't want to ask it, then hire a PR company and we can do it for you. Key messages, I think they're fairly self-explanatory in most PR campaigns or public affairs campaigns. Be clear what it is you're asking for and the reasons that you're asking for it. Repeat, and don't deviate. So what you tell X MSP on a Monday should be the same as what you tell Y MSP on a Tuesday. And your messages need to be logical, and they also have that logical and emotional side that we mentioned before. Intelligence and horizon scanning, for me, public affairs work and lobbying is about relationships and conversations. So being able to have these with your stakeholders is vital. So whether that's getting the inside scoop of what's actually going on, not just what you've read in a policy paper, actually getting to speak to the policy officer who wrote it to find out what's the real reason behind it. And what's coming down the track also allows you to flex your PR strategy and as appropriate. Timing and relevance, I'll come on to that in the sort of next slide. If you could bump me on, please, Naomi. And then finally, kind of some top tips which I think are really important for effective engagement. So wavelength is the first one. So know what it is that makes your stakeholders tick and what's important to them. So take an MSP, for example, their priority should, in most cases, be their constituents. So is there a way that you can link your campaign to a local issue in their patch? Can you perhaps utilise one of their constituents as an endorser or someone who's been affected? This is more likely to build up some goodwill and open up some doors. Evidence. It's fairly self-explanatory. Politicians like an emotional argument, but they equally like being able to quote the evidence of why something should be done. So if you can provide a case study backed by evidence, you're taking a real step in the right direction. Having an ask and a solution I've covered off in the slides before, I think, again, vitally important. Demonstrate your own credibility and value. That's something that people often don't think about when they think about their public affairs work or their lobbying. One of the most important tools that you've got in your armoury is your own experiences. So never give any stakeholder a reason to doubt your credibility and your integrity and also your value to the debate. So that's about conducting yourself respectfully. Don't be too partisan, because government, as we all know, government and politicians get put off by that. Or you can quite easily burn your political bridges by doing that. So it's about, for me, it's about being able to, as I say, demonstrate your own credibility and integrity. So what you say to politicians in private, you should be saying the same things publicly as well, and don't be going off on a tangent in social media and getting dragged into lots of different debates, because politicians will see that and they'll think, I'm not too sure about whether I should engage with that person when they're taking that kind of language on social media, for example. Be concise. We kind of all know that, unlike this presentation, we've got to bear in mind that politicians rarely have a lot of spare time, and they're often jumping from issue to issue. So you might get a bit frustrated about why they're not massively engaged in the issue that you care about, and that's valid. But also you might find that at any given day they're jumping from 10 to 15 different issues. So for me, being concise, if you can't get the solution over to one side of the A4, then I think you'll find it difficult to get anyone's attention. So for me, don't spend, and another thing as well, don't spend all your time outlining the problem. Believe it or not, politicians and officials, more often than not, they know what the problem is. We all know, take Scotland for example, we all know poverty is a problem in Scotland. We don't need to keep hearing what the problem is. What we want to hear is what is the solution. So don't spend your time telling people what the problem is. Timing is important, so you need to be aware of what politicians have got going on. So take this year, for example, we've got a Scottish Parliament election in May, and I know Shelley's going to touch on manifestos and influence in that part of it. And the window is quite clearly closing fast on that. But you have to recognise that getting the attention of politicians when there are other things going on in their life, like an election campaign, is going to be difficult. So plan when you're going to launch your campaign and when you're going to do activities. So for example, April, no politician is effectively going to engage around, because they'll be out, or you would hope they'll be out chapping doors and trying to get votes for themselves. So be cognizant of what else is going on, but also plan your activity around what else is going on in Parliament. And this is where you have to have a kind of view of all the activities going on in Parliament. So whether it's committee inquiries, government debates, the budget process, there's a whole host of things that go on in Parliament. You need to be aware of them. So for me, one of the key things is creating a forward-looking calendar, so you can identify the opportunities that are coming along down the line, and you're ready to influence them and be part of that debate. And finally, the media. I could probably do a whole presentation on the media, but needless to say, it's an important ally to have your voice being heard by the general public, but also by their representatives. So don't underestimate how easily the political agenda can be influenced by the media. But you need to handle it carefully. So it might be bizarre for someone who works for a PR company, but sometimes too much PR attention can be counterproductive. So handle it carefully. And then the final slide, Naomi, if you wouldn't mind, is just my contact details. I realise I've probably fired a lot of information at you. I haven't got into too many specifics because, as I say, each campaign will be different. But if people want to have a chat or have a virtual coffee or whatever it may be, happy to take questions today or catch up offline. And that's me.
Thank you very much, Colin. Loads of really useful tips, I think, that are coming through from that. And I've already started to note down a few questions, and I can see a few comments have started coming through in the chat that I'll pick up on as well now. So now I've been able to glance in at the screen a bit closer. I was able to read the text. So I'm delighted to welcome Sheghley Ogilvie. I couldn't read the surname before. I needed magnifying glasses, Sheghley. So really delighted that you're able to join us today and hearing about I guess your tips in terms of getting your voice heard from your experience at SCVO. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Naomi. Hi everyone. So as Naomi has said, I'm here today from the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, SCVO. SCVO is the membership organisation for Scotland's charities, voluntary organisations and social enterprises. And as you may know, Scotland's voluntary sector is made up of over 40,000 organisations, and these range from grassroots community groups, arts and sports clubs, culture and arts venues, village hall committees, to major housing, health and social care providers. I'm sure you all know that's not an exhaustive list. The voluntary sector in Scotland employ over 100,000 paid staff, work with 1.4 million volunteers, and have a combined annual turnover that reached 6.06 billion in 2018. Like in other sectors, many organisations across the voluntary sector invest significantly in developing policy solutions to the challenges that face people and communities in Scotland. Highlighting these policy solutions to political parties, Parliament and government is central to making many of these ideas a reality and improving the lives of the communities that organisations across the sector work for and with. At SCVO, we've hosted a range of meetings for our members to help them get their voice heard, but I think that the sessions that have perhaps been the most valuable to colleagues in the sector are the sessions that we've hosted with party researchers. So when I was thinking about what I would talk about today, because as Colin said, there's so much you can potentially cover and it's not one size fits all, but I thought I'd start with the party researchers and how to engage them, because that seems to have helped our members. And then I thought I'd talk a bit about political party manifesto processes, which is quite timely with the Scottish parliamentary election coming up in May. But as Colin said, the window is quickly closing to engage with them. And then finally, if there's time at the end, I thought I would touch on engaging with MSPs while we're all working from home, and it'd be really great to hear your experiences of that. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about building relationships with the political party research teams, and I've started with the assumption that you have a concern and a solution with key messages that you want to share and progress, and Colin's covered in some depth how to approach that. So since I came to SCVO, we've invested quite a bit of time to ensure our members working on policy have up-to-date contact details for the party researchers. We've had several networking sessions with researchers from Scottish political parties and plan to continue to regularly host these in the future. I think there might be a breadth of experience here, so to ensure we're all on the same page, most MSPs have a parliamentary and constituency staff who are focused on both their portfolio area, if they have one, and their local area. In addition, all the political parties have a central research team with a national focus, and it's this team that we frequently engage and network with at SCVO. All of the teams vary in size, and their briefs are often, but not always, mapped against the portfolios of the cabinet and the shadow cabinets for each party. Each party's research team operates a little differently, and in 15 minutes there's not enough time to really explore that. But when thinking about how to get your voice heard by the political parties and building relationships, I think the research teams are a good place to start. And where to start? So the business bulletin is a good place. All the research teams work on the business bulletin week to week and prepare a variety of briefings for MSPs based on parliamentary business. To inform their briefings, they welcome briefings on current issues from you. Often organisations email briefings to all MSPs, but not to the relevant party researchers. And this matters because the party researchers often prepare briefings on issues for all MSPs. And if they don't have your briefing, your concerns may not be included in briefings researchers provide for their party's MSPs. And that's particularly true for the bigger parties. And I think sometimes there's an assumption that if you've sent your briefing to MSPs, it might make its way to researchers or different people at the parties, but I've kind of found that often that doesn't happen. So you need to make sure that you're sending your briefings to all the right people. Similarly, when party researchers prepare briefings, they also reflect on briefings from SPICE. So I would say a key takeaway is if you've put a lot of time and effort into preparing briefings, you want to make sure to share them with the party research teams and SPICE to make sure they have the most impact. Of course, still send them to all MSPs if that's what you like to do, although all the parties have different views on that. But don't forget to include SPICE and the researchers. So I think this leads to, and Colin's covered this in some depth, what makes a good briefing? As Colin has said, a good briefing can be key to effective engagement, to getting your organisations and their concerns heard, understood, referenced in debates, actioned, or getting your organisation invited to roundtables and other meetings with MSPs. Over the years, I've spoken to senior researchers across all the parties about the sort of things that they'd like to receive, and the guidelines are always broadly the same. So here's what they always say. 2 sides of A4, a summary box, PDFs, some prefer Word, definitely no links to Dropbox. Include case studies, particularly local case studies. It can be good to touch on historical context, for example, if the issue was raised in the previous sitting of the Parliament. Always have the debate title as the subject of the email, clear branding, and make it clear who to get in touch with for more information. Always share the briefing at least 24 hours before a debate or meeting if you want them to get picked up. And if you've sent a briefing before and then you see sort of a similar debate, don't just assume, oh, you know, I've sent that before, the researcher already has that. They tend not to file lots of stuff because things move on and become out of date so quickly. So just send it again if you're wanting it to be picked up for something. And Colin's touched on this a bit already, but it's worth noting that a briefing with personalised local information for MSPs, such as case studies, local examples, or statistics, is more likely to get picked up. And a top tip that researchers have shared when I've met them is that briefings not used for a debate, but which include local information about an MSP's constituency, can often encourage a press release for an MSP. So even if you aren't cited in a debate, for example, perhaps in the end, the MSP didn't speak in the debate, which can sometimes happen, there can still be a good outcome for your issue if a press release or something like that results from your briefing. I think it's common, you know, that you might right away be thinking that depending on the topic and evidence you have available, getting localized information can be difficult, or it can be really time consuming to prepare briefings for all MSPs. You don't have localized information for them. If you have statistics, I'd suggest a letter or email that with the stats mail merged in can work. And alternatively, and again, this comes back to utilising the researchers, find out who's speaking at a debate. To do this, you can contact the party researchers and ask them for their list of confirmed speakers. Party researchers are really happy to be contacted with things like this. They want to have good briefings. They want their MSPs to have good briefings. They want to hear from you. So feel free to contact them. And if you're producing a briefing for MSPs, but you also want to send an additional information for an MSPs who's, you know, debating or giving a speech, then this would be a time to contact their parliamentary staff, as it tends to be parliamentary staff rather than the research teams that do their speeches for them. So some other tips I've learned and found useful from the party researchers over the years. The researchers from some of the parties meet MSPs ahead of committee meetings. So share anything your organisation is keen to have raised at committee meetings the evening before with the researchers. It can also be worth contacting the research teams if you have ideas for portfolio questions, or if you want to encourage MSPs to cross-party groups and roundtables. Each research team works a bit differently, but generally they can help you with things like that, particularly the bigger parties. Another top tip is that doesn't specifically relate to the researchers, but is useful, is you can contact committee clerks for information on committee planning days. So that ahead of planning days, you can make suggestions to the clerk or committee members for items for their work plan. And on cross-party groups, as I'm sure you know, can be an effective route through which to engage and encourage cross-party working. And positive outcomes include collective letters, open letters, charters, and calls from MSPs, and press releases on these outcomes, which can be useful for getting the profile of what you're working on increased. So to suggest an issue for a cross-party group, contact the convener. And similar to what Colin has said, ensure any activities you participate in with cross-party groups have a clear ask and don't just provide information. And Colin has spoken in depth about being clear about what you want to achieve, and that's essential regardless of the route you take to progress the issues that are concerned to you. Okay, so now I'm going to touch a bit on manifestos. As we've already said, the window is closing, so I'm going to keep it brief. As we all know, the next Scottish Parliament election is scheduled to be held on the 6th of May 2021. And this meeting is quite timely, as most of the political parties are finalising their manifestos now. A political party manifesto, nothing mysterious about it. It sets out a political party's key policies ahead of an election. And like how each party chooses to organise their research team, each party takes a different approach to their manifesto. Again, there's not enough time to sort of explore that in depth, but I'll still share a few tips. They usually have a manifesto lead, and the manifesto lead is usually a researcher based outside Holyrood. For example, they might be based at party headquarters. So if you want to influence a political party's manifesto, I'd say that having a relationship with the research lead is a good place to start. You want to keep in touch with them, you want to find out about their timeline, key milestones, and what opportunities there are to raise the issues of concerns to you. All of the timelines are different for each party, but it's worth knowing that some engagement may begin as early as 18 months before an election. And Scottish Labour in particular, they started their engagement really early this time in 2019. So it really can be a good benefit to get in touch with the researchers early, start communicating with the parties early, start finding out who their manifesto leads will be, and just getting an idea of that timeline. And really, by the end of January before a May election, you want to be in a position to share your concerns and, crucially, solutions to these concerns with manifesto leads and MSPs. So obviously, we've just passed that. But I think if you're working on a manifesto or you're considering asks for a manifesto and you haven't already done so, the time to touch base with manifesto leads is now. Even if your manifesto isn't finished, to ensure it has an impact, emailing manifesto leads with a few bullet points and highlighting that your manifesto will be published soon will be really worthwhile. And last month I met with manifesto leads from 3 of the political parties, and they were all really stressing that they were keen to sort of have summaries of the sort of things that people would have liked to be included, you know, really by the end of January. So it's a bit late, but there is still time. And if you're still going through sort of a finalisation process for your manifesto, then just drop them an email and let them know. So it's worth noting that several of the parties are considering mini manifestos this time, and most of them have a longer time frame for that. So even if you might have sort of started to miss the deadline for their main manifesto, it's worth getting in touch with them to find out what their mini manifestos will be. They'll all have different topics, and there might be topics that are relevant to you, and there's still an opportunity to influence those. Again, follow Colin's advice for ensuring you highlight key concerns along with a solution to these concerns if you want to get commitments into party manifestos. And I think maybe there's a misconception that you have to produce your own manifesto to influence party manifestos. And I don't necessarily think that's true. You can still meet, you can still send bullet points of, you know, key things you'd like to be included. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, big fancy manifesto. And always keep whatever you send for the manifesto brief and 4 or 5 asks maximum. So sometimes when I speak to the researchers, they'll talk about, you know, manifestos where they've had really huge numbers of asks, and, you know, really you need to prioritise so the researchers know where to start. And for anyone with an interest in voluntary sector manifestos, my colleague Graham Martin is collating a page on TFN. So if you want to share your manifesto with me, or, you know, with him, or if you just want to look up and have a look at the TFN manifesto page, maybe I can share it in the comments, then that'll give you, you know, a bit of an idea of what some others have done, or you can share yours there. I'll just check. Yeah, I seem to be doing okay for time. So I was just going to finish with a few ideas for engaging virtually. And this is something I'd like to hear your views on, as it's a new challenge for us all. So now that the majority of us are working from home, there's a need to take some new approaches to engaging with MSPs. And, you know, while maybe I think at the start, quite a few people working in policy and public affairs found this a bit difficult, suddenly everything online, I think that's changed, and I have heard sort of a few positive examples. So for some organisations, engaging online has been an advantage. They've been able to reach more members of their community than ever before and able to engage with more political actors as there's more of a willingness from MSPs and others to have online meetings. So that can be an advantage, particularly if you're not based in the Central Belt. I've also heard that many UK organisations have had better contact with Holyrood than ever before because distance is less of an issue. And while the party conferences have been online, less organisations have hosted fringe events. And as a result of that, I've heard that those who have hosted fringe events have had really good turnout, and amongst that turnout, really good numbers of MSPs and ministers. So I think that's something to consider when you're thinking about getting your voice heard. Of course, that might change, you know, as these conferences are online for longer, there might be more engagement. And I've also heard of a few organisations who've offered virtual drop-ins for MSPs since they can't do these at the Parliament, and that they've had really positive response to these. So just a few quick ideas. And if we have time, it'd be great to hear about anything your organisation have tried to engage, because it's always good to get some new ideas. So happy to discuss that further. And I'll end there so that we can begin discussing.
Thank you very much, Shelley. I've already seen a few questions are coming in on the chat that I'll come to, and I think it's interesting. There's a few points I made. I think back to work I did many years back in terms of looking at waste and recycling strategy, and work when I worked in the community recycling and what's now, I guess, more a reuse sector, and some of the strategies we employed. And for me, there was a lot that was about relationship building that was critical. I often tell people, go, well, how did you influence? I used to go to DEFRA and play table tennis with the civil servants, and it sounds a really odd thing to say, but actually a lot of our conversations then ended up happening over a game of table tennis because we built relationships. So I wondered if I could just get you to just pick a little bit on that kind of relationship building, and what are the tips you would give people in terms of how do they build relationships rather than just simply identify who they need to speak to as if it's perhaps a business transaction?
Yeah, so I think that I definitely say I've got good relationships with the party researchers, and I think that comes from having sort of a two-way relationship where, you know, they get in touch with you because they need help with something and you help with that thing. And then when you get in touch with them because you need help with something, then they help with that thing. And I think you need to it's just keeping each other in the loop. And when something comes through, thinking of those people and thinking, might they be interested in this? And then they'll start to do the same for you. So I think you don't want to be in a position maybe where you now and again think, oh, I need this, so, I'll contact a researcher or whatever. You want to kind of have that kind of more ongoing dialogue. It doesn't have to be time consuming, just via email. And particularly if you're working on an issue in depth. For example, I used to work on social security when the Social Security Scotland bill was going through. That was a really important time to have good relationships with the researchers. And by having, picking up the phone, dropping them emails, keeping them in the loop, they did the same for me. And there was a lot I found out during that bill process that I simply wouldn't have found out if I didn't have those relationships, or might have found out, but maybe when it was too late to influence. So I think I kind of feel like, when you're working on something with someone in your own sector, you might, be in touch with each other a lot. And I think with the researchers, you can create that sort of relationship as well. So for me, it's more about that. So I hope that helps.
No, it does. I think it's that putting yourself in a position to help other people. I always think if you always help other people or think of how it's that solution approach. I think both of you touched on that in terms of people actually want to be presented with solutions, sometimes not always problems. And it's the same thing in relationship building around kind of helping other people, then they help you. It's coming onto that. Colin, I just want to bring you in terms of any thoughts you had just around that approach, and Duncan, of course, if there's anything to add from our perspective here at SES. So Colin first.
Yeah, I think Shelley's covered it off well. Relationships are absolutely vital important. For me, stakeholder relationships are no different to any other relationship you'd have in your life. You don't want people who just come to you when there's a problem. You want people to be friendly and have that constant communication. And if you can build that relationship, it pays off dividends, because if you've got a relationship, so take Scottish Government official, they'll give you the tip off if something's coming down the line. They'll one of the things I was reflecting on that conversation was a conversation I had with a Scottish Government official, and it was about a Scottish Government working group, and I had wanted to know why my client hadn't been asked to be part of it. And she gave me a frank answer saying, we don't know them, we don't know who they are, we don't know their background. So if you are front of mind with officials or MSPs or researchers, whenever they need something, they're going to come to you, and that's worth its weight in gold. So just bear that in mind, that if you can, I mean, hopefully when life comes back to a level of normality, you'll be able to go and do mixers and receptions and build these relationships. A bit tougher just now, but it can be done.
Yeah, no, thank you, Colin. Duncan, had you just got anything to add? And then I wanted to pick up on a few just practical questions that I've seen have come through the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for most social enterprises, it's a case of their relationships are at a local level on a day-to-day basis. So I suppose, I mean, as Naomi said, the starting point is probably identifying who those people are. I mean, you'll know, instinctively who those people are. It could be somebody within economic development, it could be somebody, business gateway or whatever. But I think, yeah, identifying clearly who your contacts are, you need to build relationships with at a local level is a starting point. But then I think it does take time actually to build those relationships. I mean, actually being in regular contact doesn't take much time, but actually building relationships does take time. So it could be like months or even years. I mean, a lot of social enterprises do have those relationships already. But I think, yeah, it's a case of just like identifying them and just working at it, I think, as well. I think it's really important to work at it. As Colin said, it's the same as any relationship. It's like you have to work at it, I think, sometimes. But yeah, I mean, yeah, in terms of national kind of relationship building, that's one of the roles of Social Enterprise Scotland, is to help our members do that. And this is the role of SCVO as well. So we, at a national level, so as a social enterprise, you might not necessarily be wanting to do that or have the time or capacity to do that. So that's kind of one of our roles, is to help with that. And as I said before, get in touch with any ideas you've got about how we can do that better.
Yeah, I think as well, it's good to remind people in like researchers or whoever it is that you're creating relationships with, what your offer is. So, say if I've, sent a brief in, recently to a researcher, I'll usually like remind them, by the way, we're happy to do blah, 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 if you want to just get in touch. So stuff that's not necessarily about the briefing, but it's just reminding them what else we can do, like what SCVO's offer is to them, so that even, perhaps they're not very interested in that briefing, but it might remind them, oh yeah, but they are offering to do this, and we've got a roundtable coming up. I wonder if any of their members, will be interested in that. That would be a good way to, get some people along. So I think that can help as well. You don't want to muddy the waters, obviously, too much when you're sending a briefing, because you do want that to be the focus, but it can be good to, send a little reminder of other things that are available, through your organisation.
Thank you, Shelley. There's a few just practical things, and then I'm going to come back to this point about stakeholders and understanding that environment a bit more once we've just come to the questions that I don't want to ignore if someone's put them in the chat. So it's a very practical, what are portfolio questions?
Huh. Colin?
Yeah, you want me to?
Yeah.
Essentially, every portfolio within the Scottish Government, so you've got health, justice, economy, every 2 weeks or so, they have, or maybe even longer than that actually, they have a question time within the Parliament where MSPs are allowed to question the Minister or the ministerial team for each portfolio. So they'll ask only specific justice questions or health questions. So that's essentially what that is. It's an opportunity to ask questions of the Minister directly that you don't normally get.
Thank you, Colin. There's so much, I think, to learn about this area. So there's, everyone will have a different specialism. And someone else was asking a very specific question. How do we find manifesto leads?
Yeah, well, the easiest way is if you already have, a contact. Any researcher who works, could be in an MSP's office. All of them know who, everyone at Parliament, they know who the research team are, they know who the manifesto leads are. So if you have any contacts at all, just get in touch with them and just ask. All the people at Parliament, they don't mind being asked, and they don't mind putting you in touch with the right people. I mean, I obviously can share with Duncan all the manifesto leads, but obviously that's not a strategy, you know, for getting this information all the time. So just think about the people that you do know, and just touch base with them and just ask. Don't feel worried to do that.
It comes back to that relationship point again, really, doesn't it? If you've got some of those key relationships already, you can ask the questions, and actually no one actually also minds what you might think of as a daft question. We say that at our webinars all the time. The same is true of, I think sometimes we look at people kind of in elected roles or in those research positions, and we don't want to ask a daft question to them, we should know it. You know, they don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention as well. I mean, in terms of MSPs and local authority councils, they are, you know, they're paid by us, you know, so it is their job to represent us. And I say to social enterprises all the time, contact your MSPs and ask them and tell them what you want in terms of policies. Just tell them. I mean, it's literally their job. And local authority councils, the same kind of thing. I think there's a reluctancy sometimes because they're seen as important or whatever it might be, that they're not there to help, and they really are. I mean, MSPs are very helpful when you contact them, I find. And so local authority councillors, and obviously some social enterprises are very, very good at that actually. They, you know, some of their councillors will know them quite well, I would suggest, but there is that reluctancy, I think, sometimes. I think it's just worth emphasising that. Just go to your MSPs if you have a question. You know, that's what they're there for.
I think in terms of the contacts, I mean, there are obvious ones out there. I mean, Dave Watson at the Labour Party does theirs, Innes Taylor at the Tories, Jenny Gollan at the SNP. But as Shelley says, us telling you the names probably doesn't help you a great deal. You probably need to have more of a think about what it is you want to get across to them, and be a bit more structured rather than just dropping them an email saying, "Hi, how are you? Can we speak to you?" You probably need to, because these people, I mean, they're snowed under with manifesto submissions just now, so it's finding the structure around about that makes the introduction, and Duncan and the team at Social Enterprise Scotland can certainly help open those doors for you, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, you know, to anyone that's, you know, our members that are on today, anyone listening in, you know, we're here and we can help find those connections and help talk you through kind of how you build those relationships, or try and find members that have kind of got those successful relationships on a local level as well. So, you know, there'll be people in your local environment that maybe have those relationships that can do introductions. So, you know, think about that. And I guess that leads a little bit into the stakeholder thing. Again, as I was listening to you all talking today, I was kind of reflecting on work we used to do. And I think the thing for me about the stakeholder relationship was understanding about the different positions people working around the same policy topic will take. And I guess I spoke about having worked in kind of waste and recycling, and we were focused on the very practical solution based rather than the negative campaigning side. We used to use, Greenpeace did that. They did it really well. We didn't need that. We needed the solution based, and we positioned ourselves in the middle. Equally, industry had a different take on things. So we knew very well what different opinions were around the stakeholders, and we had an understanding of the positives and negatives around some of those different understandings. And I didn't know, with Colin, when you talk about stakeholder management, do you encourage people to kind of work in collaboration with other stakeholders to understand perhaps even sometimes opposing stakeholders' positions? You might be lobbying for one thing, but someone else could be lobbying for the opposite. So how do you manage that, or is it just a case of awareness?
No, I think you do need to manage that. You need to be aware of it. It's one of these things that comes down to resources. So, well, like I said in my presentation, you could have upwards of 200 stakeholders, but what you need to actually narrow it down as to who are the people who've really got the power to influence, and you need to then find out where it is you sit within that spectrum. So you'll have some people who are ultra negative about the issue, and you probably don't want to be in that group, or you'll have people who are solutions focused, and that's probably where you want to sit. But you still have to be aware of what the criticisms are. And for me, any kind of campaign that's successful, the more people who are working collaboratively around it is vital. So a lot of organisations will have member trade bodies. So you've got Social Enterprise Scotland, which is essentially a member or a trade body. So you've got lobbying. So you need to also make sure that you're aligned with what the trade body is saying, because you don't want to be too sort of out there and wacky. You want to be able to be aligned and taken seriously. So it's like you say, it's a stakeholder management, essentially, being able to know exactly what people around you are saying and where do you fit in that landscape.
Yeah, and I would say from as a membership organisation, it's critical to understand particularly what your members are thinking, because you don't want to have an opposing voice to the people that you're meant to represent. So, it's important to us to always hear those views and understand where our members are coming from. And the same will be true, I'm sure, of SCVO.
Yeah, we employ a lot of different engagement strategies to try and engage with members, and it can be challenging. You can never be sure, which sort of strategies will work for which issue. So just a case of trial and error. Yeah, I think Duncan was going to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted that. Sorry. I think one of the main points for us is about social enterprises being solutions focused. So I think that's why MSPs respond really well to social enterprise, because we do come up with solutions. I mean, absolutely, social enterprises need help and support, particularly at the current time, particularly financial. But I think in terms of that longer term picture, then social enterprises are seen as solutions focused. I think that's policymakers do respond to that really well. So when you do approach your policymakers at a national and local level, do come up with solutions as well as the issues you've got as well.
Yeah, perhaps, I'm conscious, I'm always conscious of time. It's becoming my catchphrase, I think, at team meetings and on webinars. We've talked a lot, I guess, about how people get their voice heard. So how do you get people to listen? What stops people listening? So what's the thing that you could do that actually stops people wanting to engage with you? Because I think it's always important to understand that flip side. So what's the big top tip about the thing that you absolutely shouldn't do that kind of stops people engaging and listening? And perhaps that's a helpful question to finish on in terms of the what not to do. And I'll go perhaps to Shelley first, because I can see you've got something.
Yeah, I think it maybe goes back to what we've all been saying, and that is not having a solution. If you don't have a solution, it's as Colin highlighted at the start, a lot of MSPs and political actors, they know what the problems are. It is solutions that they need. And also I think another thing that stops people listening is not being focused enough. So if you go to a meeting with an MSP or any political actor and you just kind of give a whirlwind tour of everything that you're concerned about and you don't have a strong focus, then they don't really know where to start. And amongst that you do know what your priority is, but you're just not communicating it very well. But they don't understand what your priority is. So I think it's having a solution and being really focused. If you can't, if you're not going to contact a researcher or an MSP knowing that, then I don't think you'll be very effective.
Thank you, Shelley. Colin?
Yeah, echo what Shelley said there about it's people who bring lots of problems but no solutions. Yeah, we can all do that. I can tell you a million things that are wrong with this country, but I don't have the solutions for them. So why should you listen to me? I want to hear people who have got solutions to the problems. The other ones I touched on were credibility, and for me, politicians don't like people who are particularly partisan or aligned to a certain party, especially, just use an example, if you're particularly aligned to the SNP and you want to engage with the Labour Party or Conservative, there's a wall there that you kind of have to overcome. Internally, people think, I don't know about them because I'm not sure about their political views. So I think being able to temper your political views, whatever they may be, is usually a good thing. We don't know you. Part of it is also important, so that's where it comes back to relationships. Time and focus is another one. So politicians, as I said in my presentation, don't have a lot of time. They don't have the time to delve into the issues as deeply as you might have. And they're running from debate to debate. They're reading one-pagers. They've got their knowledge on some issues is a centimetre deep. So being able to tailor your messaging to that, they don't need 25 pages on your issue. They need to know what the top lines are. So people get put off by receiving briefing papers that are of a certain length. So be concise is another thing that can be a barrier.
Thank you, Colin. And there's just one last little bit, because I promised our speakers would be done by 25 to, so I'd like to try and keep things on track. There's one of our attendees has put a quite useful tip just in terms of understanding the timelines and the cycles, I guess, particularly in terms of elections that people come up to, and are they looking for re-election? That might create a different interest in terms of engagement, and understanding whether what part of a cycle people are at in terms of, are they looking to be elected, have they just been elected, or are they mid-term, and understanding the difference that could make in terms of what they're willing to listen to or ready to listen to at what time. And I just wondered if you got a quick tip on that. And then I've got one last question about, we've talked a lot about kind of how you get information to people. I wonder about that follow-on. So once people have listened, what should you then do? And to me, that's just important to recognise as part of the cycle in terms of that almost the closure, not just the kind of influence early on. So just those last couple of points that I just wondered if you could just both give a response to, and then unless any other questions come in, we'll draw the session towards a close.
Colin, you go first. It sounded like you were ready to go there.
No, I was don't know who wanted to go first, but
Go on, Colin.
I'm happy to pick off. For me, where politicians are in the cycle just now is uber local. They're all thinking towards May, so they're looking for things they can get involved in their own constituency. For me, I don't think they're looking at the big national pictures just now, because the national picture is frankly dominated by one issue. Yeah. So for individual MSPs to have a real impact on COVID, probably not much they can do, because we know where we're going with that. So for me, they're looking for local issues. So the more you can bring to them that's local is important. So whether they are trying to get elected, but also a group of people that we haven't really touched on is the prospective candidates who are standing in seats. So there are a lot of people standing down this election. So I think there's something like 4 cabinet secretaries are standing down. So for your organisation, you're probably wanting to be getting a bit of intelligence about who do you think is going to be the next health secretary, because we know Jean Freeman's going to be stepping down. Who's going to be the next environment secretary, because we know Rosanna's coming. And also there are a lot of just backbench MSPs that are going. So if you've got a particular issue in an area that you know there's going to be an MSP, chances are in that area it's going to be an SNP MSP, if you believe what the polls are saying. So are you starting to build your relationships with that person just now? I think that's really important. So yeah, I think the other question, Naomi, was around
it's almost the kind of, you've done all the kind of, you've done your engagement with researchers, you've done all the prep in terms of getting your message across. How do you, I guess for me it's that, how do you then close that conversation, or do you close it, or is it just a case of thank you? So how do you finish that off, rather than always thinking, oh, we've done it now, we've sent in our response?
No, I don't think you should ever close it. I think you should always keep the conversation going, but don't just keep the conversation going for the sake of it. Actually have something useful to contribute. So we all know that the way Parliament works is you might have a specific debate on an issue, and then that you'll probably not hear anything else about it for another couple of months. So it's being plugged into what's going on in the intervening period, so that when it does come back to Parliament, you're kind of plugged into what's already happened, and you can take the debate forward, not repeating the same arguments over and over again. So just keeping that relationship going is so important.
Thank you, Colin. And Shelley?
I'll just say on the cycle, because it's quite an interesting question, that we haven't spoke about it too much, but a really interesting sort of part of the cycle is coming up now, and that's when all the new MSPs, join Holyrood in the next session. And at SCVO, we're already thinking now about what are our key issues going to be that we want to introduce new MSPs to when we introduce them to SCVO, the voluntary sector. So, I guess what I'm saying is it's not too early to start planning. Maybe you've missed, sort of the manifesto cycle, but you can start thinking about how will you introduce new MSPs, to your organisation. And on sort of closing your engagement, I think that's a really difficult one to answer, because it really depends what you were trying to achieve and what the outcome was. So I guess I feel like there's not really a one size fits all there, because you might have been successful or you might have been unsuccessful. So it depends what the goal of your briefings were and what it was you were trying to achieve.
No, thank you. Really important points. I think there's already lots of really great feedback from today's session coming in terms of the tips and the information that's been put out there. So I wanted to just thank all of our panelists today in terms of the advice and the willingness to share that. I know one question came in, Colin, about how much it may cost for an organisation to engage with someone externally, and perhaps I can hook you up with the person that asked that question, just because I think that might be a good one offline, but we'll make sure that happens. Loads of great tips. There's so much we could talk about, I think, on this area, and already people are going, oh, it'd be really good to have a particular Zoom just on that one issue. So we will certainly look at that moving forward. And then just, Duncan, just in terms of how SES will engage with people in terms of policy, I thought I'd just let you just perhaps say a few final words just in terms of how can social enterprises get involved and work with Social Enterprise Scotland in terms of increasing their voice.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point about kind of what we do next. So, this is kind of, the first webinar we've done on this topic, which I think is really important, but I think it's the first of many, hopefully. I think that suggestion about having follow-up webinars around this would be really, really good idea. Yeah, I mean, basic points really: get in touch with me as a Social Enterprise Scotland member at any time if you have a particular policy issue you want advice on, or you want to kind of get your voice heard in whatever arena that might be, a local or national level. We are looking at ideas currently at the moment in terms of improving that kind of voice, improving that kind of effectiveness of helping members. But yeah, I mean, just going back to the point really about relationship building as well. Yeah, as a social enterprise at a local level, then find out who your local election candidates are in the coming election, and as soon as your MSPs get elected, get in touch with them. Build that relationship at the very, very start of them becoming MSPs. I think that's really important. But yes, it's definitely an ongoing conversation, definitely the starting point, and we're keen to hear from members at any time about policy issues.
No, thank you, Duncan, and think about the positives as well. I always think, imagine that all these people are human beings. We don't always want to be bombarded with the challenges. We've got good success stories, I think, particularly within our sector. Challenging times at the moment, but out of them have come some real case studies, some real heartwarming stuff. Share the success and share the good news stories with people to get them on board as well, because we all need a little bit of uplifting right now as well, not just hearing what's not working. So think of the positives, and there's lots we can do. So thank you, everyone, for joining. If you want to join, I guess it's a great way to finish. If you want to join our cross-party group session next week, we'd love to have you along. And it's another great way, I guess, of looking at how we are trying to do more of that policy engagement. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And yeah, great session, really great session. Thanks a lot and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.